The next item on our agenda is the report by Mr. Schumacher, the establishment of an EU mechanism on democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights. I should just like to remind members that for all the debates of this part session, there will be no catch-the-eye procedure and no blue cards will be accepted. Mr. Schumacher, Rapporteur, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Commissioners. Of course, we are here to discuss the establishment of an EU mechanism on democracy, rule of law and fundamental rights. But what we are really discussing and should be debating is the very future and identity of the EU as a democratic peace project. Now, I grew up in Slovakia in years after the Velvet Revolution, and for people of my generation, membership in the European Union basically meant a guarantee of life in freedom and democracy. The EU was meant to be a place where you don't get imprisoned if you speak out freely, which is what the communist regime did to my grandfather, who was a dissident intellectual. The EU was meant to be a place where you don't get thrown out of your job for disagreeing with those in power, which is what happened to other members of my family. But the problem is that this image of the EU, the image of my youth, the image of the EU as a guardian of democracy is now being shattered. And instead, it has developed a very high tolerance, unacceptably high tolerance for authoritarian politics. I mean, at least we have one member state which can no longer be considered democracy. We have another member state, Poland, in which judges can be prosecuted for verdicts against the interests of the ruling party. In many other member states, we have thousands on the street protesting years of corruption and state capture, all of which begs the question, where has the EU been while national governments have undermined democratic institutions or plundered public resources? Now, the proposal that we put before the plenary should put the EU in a position to do much more. What we need is a permanent, legally binding mechanism that, first of all, streamlines and makes more effective the instruments, the rule of law instruments that we have. Second, covers all aspects of Article 2 and all values there enshrined. And third, ensures that compliance by member states is not just reviewed periodically, but also enforced. Precisely, enforcement and action is what has so far been missing also from the Commission's otherwise very thorough and very welcome report last week. But it is clear that monitoring alone will not bring back judicial independence in Poland, nor will it save the index media in Hungary. Really, we do need enforcement. For instance, in Poland, the Commission still hasn't come up with a request to impose fines, despite the fact that the Polish government is disrespecting the ruling of the European Court of Justice, and we can continue on and on. But equally importantly, the Council needs to stop diluting the budget conditionality proposal. I mean, we know that the EU money has demonstrably fueled the rise of authoritarian and corrupt politics in our member states, and this cannot continue. But the problem is, it will continue if the proposal of the German presidency is adopted, because it is weak and will not protect either the EU budget nor rule of law in Europe. Now, if the Commission and the Council are serious about restoring the EU as a community of shared values, I would expect them to begin immediately negotiations on the proposal that the Parliament is putting forward for a binding mechanism as soon as possible. Now, we know that there will be pushback, and we know that some member states might reject it outright, seeing as they are willing to hold hostage the entire continent about the rule of law conditionality. But there is a piece of good news as well. The Council only needs a qualified majority to negotiate and adopt our proposal, and therefore reclaim some of the EU's aspiration for a democratic project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Now, Mr. Fulken, the Legal Affairs Committee, you have the
werdenden Grundwertekrise in der Europäischen Union, eine Krise, die das Überleben der Europäischen Union gefährden kann. Um nichts Geringeres als das Überleben der Europäischen Union geht es, wenn Journalistinnen und Journalisten.
That is what we are talking about here. Journalists being attacked, corruption not being tackled, independence of judiciary being called into question. Quite rightly, the Commission is producing an annual report on rule of law. However, the issue of rule of law and democracy is missing from this report. What happens when you have LGBTI-free zones created in a member state? And so we need more monitoring mechanism for democracy, rule of law and fundamental rights in this report. We need this underscored with budgetary ramifications. We will fight to that end. My dear colleagues, the enemies to democracy can be found in this very House. I would thank Michel for cooperation between the committees, for taking on board our key points on whistleblower protection, on further training for legal practitioners and key projects in the MFF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should like to welcome Commissioners Jourova and Renditz into the room.
It's an honour to be here with you today to speak about the Parliament's proposal for a mechanism on democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights. Let me first thank Mr. Rapporteur, Mr. Šimečka, for his work dedicated to defending the fundamental values of the EU and such a comprehensive report. President von der Leyen said it clearly in her State of the Union speech of a few days ago. Mutual trust is at the very heart of the Union and the way we do things together. Breaches of the rule of law cannot be tolerated, and we will continue to defend the rule of law and the integrity of our European institutions. European values are not for sale. We share the objectives of the proposals of the Parliament to set a positive agenda for promoting, protecting and reinforcing Union values in accordance with Article 2 of the Treaty. This also corresponds to the objectives of the Commission for a new push for European democracy, including the first annual rule of law report published on the 30th of September as part of the new comprehensive European rule of law mechanism. And the Commission is well aware of the request of the Parliament for a broader mechanism covering not only the rule of law but also democracy and fundamental rights. I would like to underline that the scope of the rule of law mechanism is already comprehensive, as it is covering 4 areas: the national justice systems, the anti-corruption frameworks, media pluralism and media freedom, and other institutional issues related to checks and balances. The wide scope covers issues which are particularly important for the European Parliament, such as the enabling framework for civil society. All these aspects contribute also to the promotion of democracy and respect of fundamental rights. In the next years, the Commission will consider consolidating its monitoring in these areas and could cover additional aspects. The Commission also recognises the necessity to further promote democracy and respect for fundamental rights. We believe that it requires a diversity of tailor-made approaches and instruments. As regards fundamental rights, the Commission intends to present still this year the new strategy for the application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. A particular attention will be given to the application of the Charter in the Member States and impact on the daily citizens' life. And also by the end of this year, the Commission will present another flagship initiative, the European Democracy Action Plan, which will focus on countering disinformation and adapting to evolving threats and manipulations, as well as supporting free and independent media. The European Democracy Action Plan will specifically contribute to upholding fundamental rights and strengthening democracy through 3 integrated themes. They are elections integrity, The second is strengthening freedom of expression and the democratic debate. And the third theme is tackling disinformation in a coherent manner, considering the need to look together at all the means used to interfere in our democratic system. The action plan will also have a particular focus on citizens' participation and the role of the civil society. Other initiatives and strategies will also further promote our basic foundations, for instance, the forthcoming EU citizenship report and other strategies to build a union of equality. The Commission will continue to monitor the impact of measures adopted in the context of the COVID-19 crisis as regards compliance with EU law and ensuring free and fair elections and a fair democratic debate until restrictions are lifted. As regards more specifically the concrete Parliament proposals for the rule of law monitoring and its follow-up, I will now give the floor to Commissioner Reynders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Reynders has the floor.
Honourable members, I would like to reinforce, if it's possible, what Vice President Jourova just said. The Commission fully agrees with the European Parliament with regard to the importance of strengthening the EU's capacity to monitor the respect of our common values. And for this reason, the Commission presented last week, it was said by the rapporteur, Mr. Šemika, and thank you for your report, its first annual report of the rule of law, and at the centre of a comprehensive European rule of law mechanism. The mechanism is broader than just the report. The mechanism is a yearly process with the aim to prevent problems from emerging or deepening, notably by having open debates and by exchanging best practices. The aim of the rule of law report is to look at key developments as regards the rule of law across the whole European Union. It covers both positive developments and challenges and provides a country-specific assessment of all the 27 member states. With regard to the methodology as proposed by the Parliament for the annual monitoring cycle, the Commission agrees on the importance of the consultation of stakeholders and on using a variety of sources, including via visits in the member states. This has been the approach followed already for the first annual rule of law report. All the member states provided written input, and we also carry out a targeted stakeholder consultation where over 200 stakeholders provided written input. We also conducted more than 300 virtual country visits, meeting with member states' national authorities, with judicial and other independent authorities, and with relevant stakeholders, including civil society organisations. We made sure that this process was robust, transparent and inclusive. We have also kept the Parliament fully informed of our progress. This report represents the Commission's assessment, but it relies also on assessments prepared by a variety of independent experts and bodies, including the Fundamental Rights Agency and the Council of Europe. Let me also say a few words on the follow-up to the report. Its aim is to quick-start an inclusive debate at European and national level. I know that is precisely one of the objectives of the draft report of the European Parliament discussed today. In this respect, we welcome in particular the proposal that the Parliament and the Council discuss the content of the annual report presented by the Commission. We should maximise this momentum to bring about change in the Union. In this regard, I know technical preparation in Parliament have started to have your first meeting with national parliaments in October, November, and I can only welcome this as a very positive development. We are committed to work on strengthening the cooperation with the European Parliament and the Council through regular meetings and exchange of views in order to build this process together in an inclusive and constructive way. We have a common interest to swiftly set up the rule of law mechanism and the publication of the rule of law report last week is an important first step towards this objective. Pursuing this under the existing institutional arrangements would ensure the effectiveness of our cooperation. We should develop our modus operandi step by step. Whether in the future such cooperation should be codified in an interinstitutional agreement will have to be assessed at a later stage on the basis of the experience gained through the application of the European rule of law mechanism. So we will continue a permanent debate year after year on the basis of the next report, and maybe we'll try to organise a better cooperation year after year among the two institutions. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm a bizottság nevében, és most Rui de Vezáé a szó az Alkotmányügyi Bizottság nevében. Öné a szó, képviselő úr.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I should also like to thank my colleague Timo Mošević, who couldn't come here today, had to remain at home. I think that the most important thing of our union is its values. And so the first report of the European Commission on the rule of law is certainly a new stage, an important stage. We've got the budgetary values, we've got the State of the Union. This is something which is very important because we're starting an annual cycle on the rule of law. We also welcome the Parliament's report on their own initiative report, which encourages the Commissioner in the final part of their intervention and welcomes the institutional aspect, which is essential to be able to defend the rights and values of our union. One final comment, it's very important that when we have this rule of law mechanism and when it identifies serious infringements of Article 2, then it is important that the Commission starts infringement procedures and, if necessary, activates Article 7 of the Treaty and also applies budgetary conditionality. Thank you.
Now, next speaker on behalf of the group of the European People's Party, Mr. Bilčík. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, commissioners, dear colleagues. Former Czechoslovak President Václav Havel would be 84 today. So let me begin my remarks by reminding all of us of Havel's words. I quote, "Keep the company of those who seek the truth, run from those who have found it." Havel sought the truth his whole life, often doubting his own thoughts. He believed in reflection, critical thinking, and honest discussion, something that communism forbade for decades, and something that Havel saw as the essence of free and democratic Europe. He believed in open Europe and worked relentlessly and successfully for the return of Central Europeans to our common European project. So, dear colleagues, let's think of people like Havel and Europe of the past, divided and weak, as we discuss the current need for an effective mechanism on democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. Europe must protect common democratic principles and sense of European justice in order to maintain its purpose and have a meaningful future. Today's discussion is about fundamentals, which we must monitor, guard, and protect diligently, but also fairly with respect to all member states. This mechanism is not about a single country or naming and shaming of particular individuals. It is about essential foundations of democracy and institutions that should work for the benefit of all Europeans. And I want to thank the rapporteur for steering our work on this report along these lines. We have a solid text, and we should send a strong message from this House this week to the Council and the Commission about the necessity for joint ownership and joint protection of rule of law. In Havel's words, all European institutions should keep our company in search for more just and more democratic European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, Mrs. Barley, for a minute and a half, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. 80% of the Europeans think that the rule of law has a great importance and that it should be enforced in the European Union. And the European Parliament has called for a long time for such a monitoring. We have already 2016 delivered a report for that. And since then, the situation in the member states has not become better. Now we see the report of the Commission. Thank you very much for it. We still believe that our report, thank you to Michal Šimečka and the other shadows, goes further, especially in the scope, but also concerning independent experts and an automatic reaction to the breaches. But we are happy that this report is there. And we are also happy of the way how it was presented, with very clear words. It is good because now we can compare. And this argument, well, here we do the same as this country and that country, and we now have a big picture, and you have to look at all of it. The big questions: do you as a government want to be controlled? Do you believe that criticism is something positive that brings you further in democracy? I am deeply convinced we can compromise on everything, on posts, on persons, on money, on budget, on everything, but we can never compromise on our core values. We have to be very clear on this. We have the values in the treaty, we have the European Court of Justice that rules on it, and there we are not willing to compromise on anything. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Renew Europe Group, Mrs. Interveld, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to congratulate and thank the rapporteur for doing an excellent job and getting a very large majority behind this very important report. I'm quite proud to be member of a House which has always been the champion of democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights. 4 years ago, almost to the day, this House adopted the first proposal for an annual report covering all the member states, because we see in Europe today, but we also see it across the Atlantic, that the democratic rule of law is actually quite vulnerable against attacks from the inside. You know, we're protecting ourselves from attacks from the outside, but they're attacks from the inside. And that is why we need to strengthen the toolkit to uphold the values laid down in the treaties. The European Commission, and I would like to thank both commissioners for putting forward an excellent report last week, but we're going to take it one step further. And I would like to conclude with reminding President von der Leyen of her promise that she would treat legislative proposals from this House as if this House has proper legislative right of initiative. So please, Mrs. von der Leyen, follow up to the report. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Identity and Democracy Group, for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Fest, please.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much, President. The Commission wants to couple paying out money with democracy. Now, this would be a good idea if this really were about democracy and rule of law in the EU, and this is not the case. What we have seen is for years there are calls for rule of law which have been instrumentalized. Let me just give you a few examples. In Germany, you have judges appointed to the Constitutional Court. That is done politically. In Germany, it's fine. In Poland, it is a scandal. There were police attacked in Frankfurt. That's not even mentioned in the report. Turkey is basically an Islamic dictatorship, and there's no response from the EU to this. They simply continue to negotiate with Turkey on accession and send them millions. There are concerns with regards to Africa as well, but now the EU wants to set up a new partnership with Africa. The same corrupt countries being made richer, and Palestine, one of the most corrupt regimes, again, nothing is done at all. So that is why this rule of law mechanism is a fraud here in the EU. It's about pressuring other countries such as Poland because it disagrees with their ideology, or countries that don't want immigrants. The rule of law mechanism is a fraud, and it's something we cannot agree to.
Next, on behalf of the group of the Greens European Free Alliance, Mr. Lagodinsky, for 1.5 minutes.
Letzte Woche hat die Kommission einen Rechtsstaatlichkeitsbericht.
Last week, the Commission tabled a rule of law report. We have the European semester, the Justice Scoreboard, a peer review at Council, and tomorrow we will vote on our report on a rule of law mechanism. Why? It's quite simple. The time has come to consolidate all these different instruments. We can't have each institution dealing with this important area and failing to coordinate. So we, in our report, call for coordinated monitoring carried out by all three institutions. We need greater independence, credibility, an honest stock-taking exercise where we have experts involved. So we are calling for a panel of experts to be set up to flank the production of the report. We need genuine political ambition. The Commission's report is a step in the right direction, and Mr. Fest, it is not a lie or a series of lies. Last year, the Commission looked at certain issues, but Parliament has to be involved to ensure that this report is genuinely useful, and we need a complete picture, including fundamental rights, anti-discrimination rules in line with Article 2. That's what we're calling for. This is why we were elected, and that is what we will champion when we vote tomorrow.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group, for 1 minute, Mrs. Kempa, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no agreement to measures that are outside the treaties. There is no legal basis for this report. You refer to the Council of Europe statements, and the same institution that has not condemned Russia for poisoning Navalny. It's all about federalist dreams of the left to manage the member states from the top floor of the Commission building. The officials of Brussels want to introduce abortion, gender ideology, and special rights for sexual minorities. There is no agreement for this. We are discussing a report that is an attack on independent sovereign member states. Mr. Rapporteur, I lived through the times of communism, but I was not manipulated as you are. If you have anything against Poland, you need to be more concrete.
On behalf of the group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left, Mrs. Willumsen, please.
Should we accept that several EU countries go against basic fundamental rights and democratic rights? The answer must be no. If, however, we look at what is happening in Hungary under Orban, if we look at what is happening in Poland under the right nationalist government, if we look at the developments in Bulgaria, then it's clear that the EU has let down the defense of human rights and democracy. If the EU is supposed to be proud of being the defender of democracy and human rights, then we need more than nice words. Then we need action. We need an independent running monitoring of democratic rules and human rights in the individual member states. We need a clear consequence for these governments that are infringing on citizens' rights. This is why we have to close the lid on the EU coffers for Orban and others who infringe human rights and democracy. It's not just about ensuring the democratic rights of Hungarian and Polish citizens. It is about all citizens of the EU, they all deserve that their human rights and fundamental rights are respected. The ones who infringe those rights should feel the consequences. It's not like that today, and we have to change it.
Thank you. For non-attached members, for a minute and a half, Mrs. Ferrara, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry. La procedura prevista.
The procedure under Article 7 of the TFEU has shown itself to be inadequate on challenges to the rule of law, fundamental rights, and our democracy in Europe. The common values of the European Union, as enshrined in Article 2 of the treaty, are not being respected. Our citizens are therefore suffering, and we are not seeing the European project making the necessary headway. For 2013 to 2014, we saw the report appear, which was very important because Parliament acquired a monitoring mechanism country by country in order to ensure that preventive and corrective measures could be applied. And that relating to the complex set of values which are at the very basis of Europe. Democratic verification should be a very important aspect, and we should pass on from that mechanism to a more objective approach for member states, particularly in terms of sanctions and budgetary conditionality. The separation of powers, the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the media, passive and active democratic participation in the electoral process have been subject to problems. But these are the major pillars that we stand on. These are what we need in order to ensure that we're able to counter any fundamental erosion of our European values.
For a minute and a half, Señor González Pons, por favor.
Europe is a product of the values that were created post-war, those values that created the EU: dignity, freedom, democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and the separation of powers. These values existed even before the EU. It is a prerequisite to comply with the rule of law to be part of the EU. That is why we need this control mechanism that is neutral and that raises the alarm when rule of law is called into question in one of the member states, whether it's Romania, Malta, Hungary, France, any EU country. There needs to be an instrument that will guarantee that all of the members are controlled in the same way. The mechanism that is being proposed today is not about judging governments. We are certainly not tribunals here, but we want to end the practice where we see the rule of law being called into question depending on the particular political party, whether it's the left-wing government or right-wing government. This isn't about where you are on the political spectrum. This is about defending the rule of law. It is hugely important and we simply cannot play politics with it. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Señor López Aguilar, para un minuto, por favor.
Thank you, President. The history of the European Union is one of integration underpinned by rule of law and values. Now, this idea of a mechanism on democracy, rule of law and fundamental rights stemmed from the Libe Committee. We need to look at the criteria, the values enshrined in Article 2, and how we deal with those that breach those values from within. Now, Commissioner Jourova, we share solidarity with you in the face of the unjustified attacks you faced. Now, we have Article 7, and we've seen talk of double standards. Well, this mechanism is to allow a general overview, a stock-taking exercise at a periodic period. So, Commissioner Reinders, thank you. We could improve the sources and the report that you produce, but it is clear that we need conditionality here. We need conditions attached to access to EU funds and budget. That is crucial. Otherwise, we will not have resolved this problem. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Pagasaurtundúa. Un minuto, por favor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, here we seem to be in the middle of the storm, and we are not reinforcing the economic and social standards in Europe. We need a proper mechanism in order to make sure that we can monitor democracy and rule of law in our member states. We have to ensure that the power which is exercised on our citizens is proper. It's to do with dignity, it's to do with citizens' rights, and we have to make sure that we take the rudder and we steer this properly. We have seen authoritarian behaviour. It's always there, it's always with us, and we have to do our work and ensure that we have a fundamental role as a parliament in the operation of this mechanism. It's important that we have something which is really objective, which will really work. Otherwise, we can't encourage some and discourage others. We have to do this, realizing that there are state bodies at the moment which are governing and which pose a risk to our democracy. We have to challenge this, we have to work on this in order to ensure that we have what is right for tomorrow.
Minute and a half, Monsieur Le Breton, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The EU also already has economic tutelage over its member states, but that's not sufficient. Now it wants to control them ideologically as well. This report is the instrument of this new federalist offensive. I am firmly opposed to this. I do not want my country to be treated like a child. I do not want it to be judged by experts who will behave as political commissioners, or for it to be forced to respect certain ideologies such as gender, taking in immigrants, all-powerful judges, or rejecting our cultural and religious roots that are part of our identity. We do not want political correctness to be forced on us as a way of combating fake news or disinformation. The Europe I want is at the other end of the spectrum to what you're looking for. I want a free Europe that's proud of its multiple identities, and its ambition should be to promote its civilization rather than self-flagellation. I want a strong Europe that would work together amongst the member states to face the dangers from outside, the migratory flows, rather than always bringing the false responses or submitting.
Merci. Next speaker for 1 minute, Mrs. Spurek, please.
Thank you, Madam President. W ubiegłym tygodniu
Last week in Poland, we witnessed a funeral of a 12-year-old girl who was attacked for her trans sexual identity. For months, Polish politicians have been waging a hate campaign against sexual minorities. Last time in the parliament session, they President of the Commission used very nice words, but Poland is receiving large sums of money from the EU, at the same time flouting fundamental rights. We need a mechanism that would be based on Article 2, but if the Commission will not use its powers, it's going to be just words.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Jaki, please.
Dziękuję bardzo. Szanowni Państwo.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you are attacking Poland in with references to history, attacking us, accusing us of authoritarianism. But you have a political majority, because historically, when Poland was attacked by the Soviets and Germany, your countries were standing by. And for fighting for freedom, you gave up Poland to the Soviets. So if you give us back those years, you will not be so arrogant. Today, you are accusing us of LGBTI-free zones, but Poland has always been a country that never discriminated against homosexuals. Today, you are not happy about Poland because Poland is doing very well economically and otherwise. You could learn from Poland, but you don't like this, and that's why you criticize it so much.
For 1 minute, Mr. Uhrik, please.
Dear colleagues, dear European commissioners, Mr. Šimečka, excuse me, but this is indeed too much to digest. You want to condition the disbursement of money from the common European budget by compliance with liberal values and rules of the European Union. So the states which are to be judged as disobedient by you, the Brussels politicians, and not by independent courts, these states shall just keep paying to the EU but shall not receive anything back. You shall tell it straight that you want to punish Poles, Hungarians and Slovaks for not willing to receive migrants, for not willing to pursue LGBT agenda, and not willing to blindly obey NGOs and liberal journalists, because this is indeed the reason. We don't want to support anything like that, because in Central Slovakia and in Central Europe and in Slovakia we have experience with such a regime, and it used to be called totalitarian regime. People are becoming poorer, and you are blocking the approval of the European budget and disbursement of aid by imposing such nonsense measures.
Minute and a half, Mr. Rangel, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senhoras Comissárias, Sr. Šimečka.
Commissioner, Mr. Šimečka, congratulations on the work done. I am pleased to note that finally steps are being taken to adopt a mechanism that would apply to all member states, a monitoring mechanism for rule of law. I would draw your attention to one point. We focus very much on the fact that there should be no assistance to member states that breach rule of law provisions. There are member states that do not receive funding, and how would they be punished if they breach rule of law? And anyhow, rule of law is a fundamental value. It cannot be monetized. These are fundamental rights, cornerstone of European identity and democracy. So we need a mechanism that truly applies to all member states, not only those member states that are net recipients of EU funds. You can't have a control mechanism for democracy and rule of law if it only applies to the poorest member states. Under convergence, we need a mechanism that applies to all. The largest, the richest, the smallest and the poorest.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mrs. Inzer, please.
So it's time for EU to not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. EU is built on the nation that we are stronger together, and that fundamental rights and values must never be an issue up for compromise. And I'm happy, therefore, that still is an overwhelming majority in this parliament who stands up for those rights, even though there are a few extremists on that side who screams and are trying to say otherwise. However, I'm worried about the current development at the same time. We see attacks on independent media, on LGBTQI people, we see attacks on women, we see attacks on migrants, we also see a politicization of independent judiciary. I welcome, of course, the new rule of law report presented last week, but we need to go further. This resolution suggests important measurable goals, involvement of civil society and a broader scope to also include fundamental rights and democracy. We must make sure that the EU does not remain a toothless tiger, because this report is good, but we need to make sure to provide it with teeth. So one of the best ways of providing the tiger with teeth is through a stronger conditionality linked to the budget. Our values are for sure not up for compromise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mrs. Donat, please.
Köszönöm szépen. Ma Európában egyes kormányok a jogállamot rombolják, embertelen és igazságtalan rendszert kiépítve.
Well, here there are certain countries which are putting an emphasis on democracy, rule of law and fundamental rights.
Vezetőkkel szemben.
I think it's very important that we tackle member states which are not complying with the rule of law. It's important that we create mechanisms which we cannot get around. The citizens of these countries are suffering under certain measures. The Hungarian people is not the same as Viktor Orban is. People who are members of civil organizations, enterprises, companies, they're all working together against this. And it's very important that Europe stands together as based on the rule of law.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Deman, please.
Collega's.
Honourable members, certain rights of member states are to be linked to their respect for democracy. That sounds very noble, but there is a hidden agenda. If I run counter to the progressive, modern, multicultural agenda, then I will face attack. Look at Hungary and other member states. They are to be punished because they don't fit in. There is a problem in the EU. It doesn't have the means to punish the member states, and this mechanism is to introduce a sanctions mechanism. Now, the countries that are brave enough to go up against the Commission are to now face a new dictatorship, and they are to be forced to give up their battle. They have to accept mass immigration, the gender ideologies, and look at their so-called independent judiciary. Colleagues, this is not a Europe of sovereign nations. That is what we champion in our group. This is an EU SSR, a soft form of dictatorship.
For 1 minute, Mrs. Kanko, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Merci, Monsieur Renders, pour votre rapport. The deeper our challenges, the more our values matter. Times of crisis can erode freedom and fairness. As we all know, no country is immune for this. Protecting human rights, promoting free speech and free media, passing legislation that does increase freedom and not discriminate, and ensuring court systems that do not allow political interference or bias. This is the only true path to stability and prosperity. The rule of law is not the enemy of great government. The belief that our values are extinguishable is. The rule of law was not designed to protect governments and elites, but to protect people. For those that seek to stray from our shared values, I hope they reach the conclusion that by respecting democracy and the rule of law, there is much to be gained and far less to lose. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mrs. Rookmaker, please.
This is an EU mechanism that has been proposed. Is this solution? Well, I don't think it is. We need an objective benchmark for that to be the case so that we can properly take stock of the state of play in all member states. We don't have that objective stock-taking mechanism in place. Unfortunately, what we will see is quibbling, perhaps more countries leaving the EU. This type of mechanism would only work. Well, otherwise we're going to face higher administrative burden with this mechanism without achieving the goals set. Now, there are good intentions. I'm sure a lot of work has gone into this to promote democracy and rule of law, but I do wonder whether this report will really achieve the goals set. Will it not end up doing more evil than good? I would point out that the EU itself isn't always terribly democratic, and perhaps we should start by getting our own house in order. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Peters, please.
President, Commissioner, honourable members, Commissioner von der Leyen, in her State of the Union address, really cut to the core. She said rule of law protects people against the power of the state. Now, we should not underestimate this. We need an independent judiciary, press freedom, so that we can protect rule of law. More and more journalists face pressure. Judges are facing growing influence, and we need to be clear in the European Parliament. The Article 7 procedure needs to be linked to budgetary conditionalities so that EU funds are linked to respect for rule of law. We call for structural objective assessment of rule of law, and we want clear consequences for those that breach rule of law. Otherwise, any discussion on rule of law will fall flat. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mrs. Dobrev, please. Micro. I think we need micro. I'm sorry.
Now? Köszönöm szépen a szót.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Now, I'm often asked with regards to the rule of law and what we're fighting for. Well, rule of law protects people to make sure that power is not abused by the authorities. There needs to be protection for them. So when we're fighting for rule of law, we're fighting to protect people. We're also fighting for taxpayers. They need to know that their taxpayer money is being used to promote the country, not for people to simply enrich themselves. The rule of law is there to make sure that governments simply cannot squander taxpayers' money. So the rule of law also protects the taxpayers. Orban simply wants to fill the pockets of his oligarchs with EU taxpayer money, but we want these millions that go to Hungary to be used to actually help the country and to promote the rule of law.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Lagos, please.
Thank you. I hear very words, but for me they're only words, because in practice I've lived what you'd call fascism and racism. I've lived through that. 7 years ago, I was imprisoned, illegally imprisoned, with intervention of the Prime Minister of Antonis Samaras, the Prime Minister then. The soundtrack, the recording exists. It was heard in the Greek Parliament. The Prime Minister of the country was talking to top judge, Poyakos, and said, next day, the 3 MPs should be remanded in custody. Why? Because they were talking about Christianity in Greece in a season when we were talking about the new world order and illegal migration. And then we were under the memorandum of understanding and they sold away Greece. And this recording existed, and nobody dared in the Greek Parliament to react to this recording. A few months after it was buried by the politicians, the justice authorities demanded that they should examine the case and prosecute the Prime Minister. This didn't happen because the whole political world covered the Prime Minister. I heard the representative of the EPP talking about democracy, when his own party, we have this politician who was a Prime Minister then, and he was not prosecuted because he was covered by the other forces. This is the democracy that the European Union wants to implement against those who are speaking the truth. After 7 years, I'm telling you, I was persecuted, that I will not be moved. I'll continue to talk for Christianity and my country in Europe.
The time limits. The next speaker, Mr. Radev, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I would like to commend Mr. Šimečka for his report. The rule of law is one of the basic values of the European Union. That is why it's important to have coordination between the European institutions. The upholding of the rule of law, and we all agree on that, also means not allowing any form of double standard against the member states. I have to state that the first annual report is the right step in the right direction. The new non-discriminatory mechanism presented by the Commission put every country on an equal footing by introducing single and objective criteria and giving recommendations to support the efforts on a national level. During the debates in the last sitting of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Commissioner Reynders committed to working for building a real culture of the rule of law. Yet another initiative in this direction is the allocation of monies from the EU in respect to the upholding of the rule of law in the member states. I think this should be part of the instruments and the toolbox of the EU in order to protect the rule of law and democratic values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, which concludes our debate, the list of the speakers. And now I would like to give the floor back to the committee.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Honourable members, I would like to thank you for this fruitful discussion, which showed the urgency of the topic. Well, I think that the development in the EU in the last decade shows that we had undermined something, that we believe that the rule of law principle, democracy, fundamental rights, all these universal, not left and right, but universal European values will be lasting forever, that they do not need any kind of effort and any kind of protection. We were mistaken. That's why now we try to enlarge our toolbox and enlarge our possibilities to address the problems we see in the member states and to tackle the problems together with the member states. It is the meaning and the purpose of the rule of law report which we presented last week. We needed to have new preventive tool which we will create in the report we will develop in inclusive manner using transparent methodology which will invite us for the dialogue with the member states. And I believe in dialogue, even with the member states where we seem not to have very welcoming reactions. We also needed to come with the conditionality. relating to EU money. We are going to distribute 1.7 trillion euro in the next years. For a very good reason, the European Union has to use the money for the best purpose, to help the European citizens to get out of this crisis and to develop new qualities and to open the chance for the development in promising areas. But it cannot work to distribute such a big amount of money while we are in the atmosphere of decreasing trust. It cannot work. That's why we want to achieve this conditionality to be introduced in our system. And the Commission will work also, as I said to you, on the strategy on the implementation of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the European Democracy Action Plan. So you're calling for covering the whole scope, which we see also in Mr. Šimečka's report, which I heard many times from Sophie in 't Veld and other members of the Parliament. The Commission is addressing all three, but uses three different, if I may say, vehicles or methods. In the European Democracy Action Plan, we want to come with efficient measures how to protect the free and fair elections, because whatever we do, whatever positive we do, protect democracy and the rule of law in the member states, the first and the last word is for the citizens living in the member states. That's why I think we should do more to protect their right to cast their free vote. And that's why in the action plan we will focus on protecting the system where there is a level playing field for campaigning and financing of the political parties and political campaigns. We would like to have guaranteed fair judiciary oversight over the elections. And last but not least, the access to information, to objective information. So we will focus on the freedom of speech and pluralistic media, which will deliver objective information. And I think that we have to continue our work. It's quite obvious also from today's debate that there is a very demanding job for all three institutions, be it the Commission, the Parliament, the Council. We have to find the way how to continue the work and not to rely on the naivism from the past that rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights are some kind of perpetuum mobile which will last forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. And now I would like to give the floor to Commissioner Reynders, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Je voudrais remercier
I should like to thank the members of this Parliament for the very broad support that they have given to the defence of common values. Crucially important because these common values allow us to develop confidence in the European Union. And they also support cooperation, legal systems, external relations. The annual report on the rule of law is part of this mechanism. I think it's important when you look at the report of the Commission, as I said, the Commission is the guardian of the treaties and it has presented a report on the 27 member states of the Union. Of course, it doesn't contain any formal recommendations, but it's important to remember that the report does have clear assessments which will allow all institutions to continue their monitoring for future editions. That's a very clear message within the body of the report. Then, as has been mentioned several times, the Commission wants to continue to use the other instruments which are available. The report is an additional instrument, and the infringement procedure, that's one instrument. There are several possible procedures or procedures linked to Article 7, which are currently before Council, so that we can provide a well-proportioned and effective response to any attempts to undermine the rule of law. So we are working with this and we hope that we shall be able to establish an additional instrument, an effective instrument linked to the budget relating to respect for the rule of law. The Commission is committed to an interinstitutional dialogue, as several members of Parliament have asked, a dialogue on the rule of law. We shall continue to exchange opinions with you and the Council, not just on the subject of the first report, but of course mechanisms which may be established on the future. On one point, I should just like to remind you that the Commission has presented a report, but nothing prevents the Parliament during the course of our discussions to associate experts in their work. Also, we are counting on your support, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, to engage dialogue with national parliaments. This is an important point, an important moment. Not only are we having discussions in Council, the German presidency has already scheduled in discussions on this, but what is also important is to discuss this not just in the European Parliament, but in national parliaments too. And as I said to the Libe Committee, if you want to have reports, member state reports within the Parliament, the Commission is always ready to help. It's clear that the report relates to member states, but to talk to your neighbours, to talk to candidate countries, to talk to partners, whether in Africa or elsewhere in the world, speak about the rule of law, respect for fundamental rights. But also, we should ensure that when so doing, that we do our work back home. The procedure that we are using is part and parcel of this, and the annual report should be an annual monitoring of the rule of law in the European Union. It is a very important instrument if we want to be credible when defending our shared values outside the European Union. Thank you.
Monsieur Commissaire, and last but not least, our rapporteur, Mr. Šimečka, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Vice President. And thanks to everyone who took part in this debate. And specifically, I would like to thank all the rapporteurs or the shadow rapporteurs who have worked on this file and made it a better text. They were all very constructive and helped produce a report which I hope will gain a broad majority in the vote tomorrow. Let me also very briefly respond to some of the critical comments, and specifically to Mr. Fest, who is somehow suggesting that this is a disingenuous exercise because we don't criticize Turkey or some African republics. Now, obviously, I would love if both Turkey and countries in our neighborhood subscribe to the same rule of law mechanism and conditionality that we have here. But I mean, that's not possible. And I think to have credibility externally, we precisely need to do this at home to make sure that our member states subscribe to the values and principles of the EU. And to Madam Kempa, who is suggesting that somehow I don't like Poland or I'm being manipulated. First of all, this is nothing against Poland. I'm being a Slovak. Obviously, I consider Poles to be my brotherly nation. The problem is with the current Polish government, and it's just not just me saying that. It's the European Commission, it's the European Court of Justice, it's the Council of Europe, and all sorts of other organizations. So there's no conspiracy against Poland. Finally, I would like to thank both Vice President Jourova and Commissioner Reinders for their commitment, for the rule of law report that they presented, which indeed is a historic step forward that must be acknowledged. The issue that we have and the proposal that we are putting forward is to make it stronger, to make a clear link with enforcement and further action, obviously to enlarge the scope, but also to put it on solid legal grounds through an interinstitutional agreement, which the Parliament can propose, because there might be commissioners after you who will not have the same kind of commitment. There might be a presidency after which will not have the same kind of commitment. So we want to have something that is solid and which all three institutions can have joint ownership of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the debate is closed. The vote on the amendments will be held tomorrow, and the